For 30 years, a single padlock kept the world from knowing Sammy Davis Jr.'s darkest secrets. Inside a dusty storage unit in Burbank, rented under a fake name and paid for in cash, lay a time capsule no one dared open. When investigators finally cracked it, they didn't just find memorabilia. They found letters revealing his real mother's identity, tapes that could destroy Hollywood careers, and proof of a love affair so dangerous it nearly cost him his life. After 3 decades of silence, the truth is about to be told. For 30 years, a single storage unit in Burbank sat in silence, its lock untouched, its rent paid in cash, month after month. The name on the lease wasn't real, but the man behind it was one of the most electrifying performers America had ever seen, Sammy Davis Jr. When the unit was finally opened, it wasn't just costumes and gold records waiting in the shadows. There were letters revealing the truth about his real mother, secret tapes that could shatter reputations, and proof of what really happened with Kim Novak in 1958, a scandal so dangerous it almost ended his career. Sammy had documented everything. Now, after 3 decades of silence, the world would finally hear his story. Sammy Davis Jr. entered the world on December 8, 1925, in Harlem, New York City. His parents, Sammy Davis Sr. and Elvira Ella Sanchez, were vaudeville performers, which meant the stage lights were practically in his blood. But even from birth, there were things he wasn't allowed to say out loud. His mother was Cuban, and at the time, anti-Cuban prejudice in America was enough to hurt a career, so the truth was hidden. Harlem, in the late 1920s, pulsed with jazz, poetry, and the roar of the Harlem Renaissance, a place where art was both survival and rebellion. For Sammy, it was also a playground. By age 2, he was performing with the Will Maston Trio, led by his father and family friend Will Maston. While most toddlers learned to color inside the lines, Sammy learned to charm audiences from the footlights. The road became his classroom. No chalkboards, no school bells, just train cars, backstage quarters, and the roar of the crowd. He taught himself languages, instruments, and a relentless work ethic. But he also learned something harsher, that the world would not be kind to a black performer in America. He saw whites-only signs, felt the sting of exclusion, and began to understand that breaking barriers would take more than talent. By age 7, Sammy had already reached the silver screen in Rufus Jones for President. It was a lighthearted comedy, but the image of a black boy as president in 1933 was quietly revolutionary. Sammy's smile could disarm a crowd, but behind it was a fire already starting to burn. At just 3 years old, Sammy's life took another sharp turn. His parents split. His father took custody, pulling Sammy even deeper into show business. Will Maston became more than a mentor. He was like a godfather, shielding Sammy from the worst of the road, but no one could shield him completely. Even as a child, Sammy saw how black entertainers were treated, booked to entertain white audiences, then shown the back door when the applause ended. Still, talent was his shield. By the time most kids were learning multiplication tables, Sammy was a seasoned pro, traveling city to city, leaving audiences in awe. And then, in 1943, everything changed. At 18, 5'6", and just 120 pounds, Sammy was drafted into the U.S. Army. He joined one of the first integrated units, thinking it might mean progress. Instead, it was a brutal education in just how deep racism ran. The first soldier he met called him a slur. The second punched him in the face. The stories from those years are hard to hear. White soldiers kidnapped him, tied him to a tree in the freezing cold. They painted his skin white as a cruel joke. They spiked his drinks with urine, broke his nose 3 times, and scrawled slurs across his forehead before forcing him to perform. One savage beating left him in the hospital for 3 days. No charges, no justice. For Sammy, the Army was supposed to build men. Instead, it tried to break him. There were nights he thought about ending it all, but survival was in his blood. And in the Army's entertainment unit, he found his weapon, performance. Even the men who despised him couldn't ignore his voice, his dance, his command of the stage. When Sammy returned to civilian life in 1951, he wasn't the same boy who had gone in. He'd survived war, both the one overseas and the one in his own barracks. Now he was ready to fight for a place in show business. That fight began on the Sunset Strip at the glamorous Cyro's nightclub in March 1951. The Will Maston Trio opened for Janice Page, and by the end of the night, the room was theirs. The real turning point came just weeks later. After the 1951 Academy Awards, Ciro's was packed wall to wall. Mary Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, Cary Grant, Marilyn Monroe, Judy Garland, Hollywood royalty leaning forward in their seats as Sammy took the stage. What happened next felt like lightning. For 20 minutes, he was unstoppable, singing, dancing, doing impressions so sharp they had the stars laughing and cheering like fans in the cheap seats. When the curtain fell, it wasn't just applause. It was the sound of a career being born overnight. Word spread fast. Bookings poured in. In 1952, Sammy appeared on Eddie Cantor's Colgate Comedy Hour, and ABC even offered him a $20,000 TV pilot, an unheard of opportunity for a black entertainer at the time. Sponsors pulled out, afraid of backlash, but it didn't matter. Sammy had broken through. Then, in November 1954, everything nearly ended. Driving his Cadillac from Las Vegas to Los Angeles, Sammy's car collided with another at a fork on Route 66. The crash slammed the horn button into his left eye, shattering it. Rushed to the hospital, he was told it couldn't be saved. Friends like Frank Sinatra rallied around him. He wore an eye patch at first, then a glass eye, and made jokes about being a one-eyed Negro who's Jewish, humor masking pain. But just 8 weeks later, he was back on stage, dazzling Hollywood's elite again. That accident led to something deeper. During recovery, Sammy read about the Jewish struggle for survival. Eddie Cantor gave him a mezuzah, and Sammy said the philosophy felt like something he'd carried all his life. In 1960, he formally converted to Judaism, a decision met with ridicule by some, but to Sammy, it was a source of strength. Las Vegas, though, still had its own walls. In the 1950s, he could headline casinos but wasn't allowed to stay in them, eat in their restaurants, or use their pools. Sammy refused to accept it. With the help of the Rat Pack, he pressured owners to change. By the early 1960s, he was earning $25,000 a week and had become the first black entertainer to stay at the Frontier. Vegas segregation wouldn't officially end until 1971, but Sammy helped force the city's hand. They didn't call him Mr. Show Business for nothing. Sammy could do it all: drums, trumpet, piano, vibraphone. He could mimic any voice, deliver a stand-up routine, pull off flawless impressions, dance with impossible precision, even perform trick gun spins. His shows were part concert, part comedy act, part magic show, and every night was different. In 1956, he set his sights on Broadway. Mr. Wonderful opened on March 22nd, written specifically for him, almost unheard of for a black star at the time. Critics panned it, calling it loud and mediocre, but the box office told another story. Audiences packed the theater for 383 performances, recouping the $225,000 production cost. Sammy's charm turned mixed reviews into standing ovations. 8 years later, he returned to Broadway in Golden Boy. It was 1964, and Sammy played a black boxer in love with a white woman, a storyline explosive enough to trigger bomb threats and death threats. But Sammy didn't back down. Night after night, he walked on stage, kissed his co-star, and faced the hate head on. The role earned him a Tony nomination and cemented his reputation as a performer willing to challenge America's deepest prejudices. He wasn't just speaking out on stage. In 1965, he marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma, risking his career and his safety to demand civil rights. Hollywood came calling, too. Sammy starred in Anna Lucasta, 1958, with an all-black cast, Porgy and Bess, 1959, alongside Sidney Poitier and Dorothy Dandridge, and Sweet Charity, 1969, under Bob Fosse's direction. But it was his membership in the Rat Pack that gave him some of his most iconic film moments: Ocean's 11 in 1960, Robin and the Seven Hoods in 1964, where his charisma shined just as brightly as Frank in Sinatra's or Dean Martin's. On television, Sammy became a fixture. The Ed Sullivan Show, The Tonight Show, and his own NBC variety series in 1966, making him one of the first black entertainers to headline primetime network TV. He filled it with Hollywood's biggest names, from Elizabeth Taylor to Richard Burton, working tirelessly to promote the show and open doors for other black artists on television. Sammy's friendship with Frank Sinatra went back decades, long before the Rat Pack. They first met in 1941 when Sammy was just 15, performing with the Will Maston Trio in Detroit. Frank, then 26 and touring with Tommy Dorsey's orchestra, saw Sammy on stage and knew instantly he was watching a rare talent. Over the years, Sinatra became both a mentor and a shield. In 1947, he arranged for the Will Maston Trio to open for him at New York's Capitol Theater, a break that changed Sammy's career trajectory. And when racism tried to slam doors in Sammy's face, Frank kicked them open. In 1950, Sammy was refused entry at the Copacabana in New York because of his race. Sinatra was furious. He made sure Sammy returned the next night, and this time they walked in together, sat at the same table, and made it clear they wouldn't perform anywhere that didn't treat Sammy as an equal. When Sammy's 1954 car crash left him hospitalized and blind in one eye, Sinatra paid the bills and brought him to Palm Springs to recover. He didn't let Sammy wallow. "Get back on stage," Frank told him, "or you'll lose everything." Within weeks, Sammy was performing again. By 1960, their bond was front and center in Ocean's 11. The film wasn't just a box office hit, it was a symbol of Sammy's arrival in Hollywood's inner circle. No longer a sidekick, he was one of the stars. But away from the cameras, Vegas still had rules. Black entertainers couldn't stay in the hotels where they performed. Sammy fought to change that, becoming the first black headliner to get free room and board at the Frontier Hotel, a crack in the wall of segregation that would eventually come tumbling down. And while his career soared, his personal life became a lightning rod for controversy. In 1957, he fell for Kim Novak, one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Their romance was tender, secret, and dangerous. In an America where interracial relationships were despised by most and illegal in many states, their love was playing with fire. Sammy and Kim Novak first met on The Steve Allen Show, and sparks flew instantly. Soon they were spending holidays together, meeting each other's families, all in the shadows. In the late 1950s, only 4% of Americans approved of interracial relationships, and the brutal lynching of Emmett Till was still fresh in the public's mind. They took every precaution. Sammy would hide under blankets in the backseat of cars. They met at a secluded beach house in Malibu. But in January 1958, a gossip column falsely claimed they were engaged, and the fallout was immediate. The studio heads panicked. The mob got involved. Sammy was kidnapped by mobsters tied to Columbia Pictures and given an ultimatum: end the relationship or lose his other eye, or worse. Even mob boss Sam Giancana admitted he couldn't protect him in Hollywood. Terrified, Sammy broke things off with the Kim on January 7th, 1958. Just 3 days later, he married singer Lorraine White, a black woman, in a rushed, loveless arrangement meant to calm the press and the mob. He paid her up to $25,000 for the ordeal. That very night, in despair, he tried to strangle her in a drunken breakdown. His assistant later found him alone with a gun. The marriage ended by April. The Novak episode had nearly destroyed him, but Sammy's next marriage would be an even bigger challenge to America's racial lines. In 1960, he wed Swedish actress Britt, an interracial marriage that was illegal in 31 states at the time. They had planned to marry at Temple Israel of Hollywood, but bomb threats forced them to move the ceremony to Sammy's home in the Hollywood Hills. Frank Sinatra and Peter Lawford stood as witnesses. The backlash was vicious. Swastikas were painted on their property. May lost her contract with 20th Century Fox. President Kennedy, under political pressure, disinvited Sammy from his 1961 inauguration. Still, the couple built a family, daughter Tracy in 1961, and 2 adopted sons, Mark and Jeff. But the hate never fully stopped, and Britt's acting career was over. By 1968, after 8 years of marriage, May filed for divorce, citing extreme cruelty in Sammy's affair with singer Lola Falana. The wounds ran deep, and Sammy's life soon began to spiral into addiction. When Sammy died, the full scope of his financial collapse came into view. His widow, Altavise, was left with more than grief. She inherited the tax debt because she had co-signed their returns. She was forced to sell their 11,000 square foot Beverly Hills mansion for $2.7 million, but most of it went to cover the mortgage. The debts were staggering. Sammy still owed $2,000 for tuxedos, $3,500 for groceries, $118,000 on a shopping center mortgage. Even his life insurance and future royalties were seized by the IRS. The final insult came in September 1991, the auction. More than 1,800 people packed into a Los Angeles venue to bid on 500 pieces of Sammy's life. His gold record for the Candyman went for $4,075. A pair of his tap shoes fetched $11,000. Scrapbooks, walking sticks, hats, even personal jewelry all went under the hammer. The sale raised $439,000, barely making a dent in the $7 million debt. Altavis wept as strangers carried away her husband's treasures. Some items never even made it to the auction. Among the missing were 185 pieces of jewelry and an Andy Warhol painting. Then came the twist. In late 1991, a 28-year-old man named Matthias Hornick got a strange bill for $365 for a storage unit he'd never rented. His ID had been stolen. When the storage company in Burbank investigated, they discovered the unit had been rented with fake information paid for in cash. Fearing it might contain something dangerous, the manager called the police. Inside, they found what looked like a time capsule: Sammy's trumpet, an antique record player, a jukebox loaded with the Candyman, clothing, documents, and personal photos. Someone had rented the unit just 2 weeks after the auction, hiding the items from the IRS. The culprit turned out to be an employee of Altavis. He claimed he was trying to save what was left of Sammy's belongings from government seizure. The truth of that motive remains murky. It was a haunting epilogue to the life of a man who could command any stage, yet in the end couldn't keep the world from picking apart what he left behind. Sammy Davis Jr. had lived as Mr. Show Business, but his final act was a story of brilliance, resilience, and heartbreaking loss.